The B-17 is perhaps one of the most iconic bombers of World War II. Its role in the European theater in defeating Nazi Germany is undeniable. That's not to say other Allied aircraft aren't important, but how many of those had an Intellivision game made about them?
B-17 bomber and Intellivoice from the...
Now for the part I'm sure you're all waiting for. It's supposed to talk. Oh yeah, that's right. See, in 1982, the Speak and Spell was doing extremely well, and Mattel Electronics noticed this, so they decided to bring that same voice technology to their premier toy, the Intellivision.
Speak and Spell for words, speak and read for stories, speak and math for numbers. From Texas Instruments, they make learning fun.
Mattel became committed to the idea of the Intellivoice, even going as far as opening up their own studio where they would record actors and digitize it there. The Intellivoice used its own onboard memory to store certain words so they could put together to make phrases. The Intellivoice, despite promising initial sales and a free unit with the purchase of Intellivision, the consoles unfortunately fell flat because retailers who would order them ended up with the product just sitting on the shelves. Alright, the moment you've been waiting for. Make sure you have a tight connection, otherwise it doesn't work.
Mattel Electronics presents B-17 bomber.
Some consumers were actually so off-put by the B-17 bomber that they actually returned the cartridges thinking it was defective. But in reality, B-17 bomber was actually voiced in someone doing a southern accent, and that was digitized. And he was told to do this on purpose because apparently there is a southern character in the game, or at least that was the idea.
Now get a free Intellivoice module by mail when you buy any Intellivision Master component.
B-17 bomber was actually almost air traffic controller, with the player receiving directions on landing an aircraft from the Intellivoice, who would play the role of the air traffic controller. The programmers thought that was extremely boring, and they almost went with Harbor Control Master instead, with the player being directed through heavy fog as a boat captain. But luckily someone suggested, hey, let's do flying fortresses over Europe, and the programmers, deciding that was a much better idea, just kind of took that and ran with it.
To turn World War II into a great home video game, you need B-17 bomber.
B-17 bomber was finished on April 23rd, 1982, with just 1 hour to spare, essentially before it had to be shipped off to the ROM factory in Arizona. So essentially the game only had a half-hour play testing before it was even released, with most of the game testers and developers saying the game was close enough.
It takes all of a pilot's strength to keep a 30-ton fortress in tight formation.
Bit of an abstract comparison of B-17 bomber to the real events of the war, and the way the B-17 was used. Basically, the B-17 in the game is flown by itself. The Intellivoice calls out targets as they come in. That's kind of the beauty of the device, and that's how the game's played. The way the war was really fought with B-17s was that they flew in massive numbers together to defend one another, in staggered formations, so that the 13 50 caliber machine guns mounted at almost every angle of approach on a B-17 could defend the other planes next to them.
Arranged to overcome the danger of gunners firing into friendly ships.
The B-17 gets its name Flying Fortress from the massive number of guns it carries and the heavy armor. The idea behind it, at least the doctrine that was put in the 1930s to its development, was that this bomber could fly into enemy territory by itself and defend itself against enemy air cover, and then return home without any problems because of its heavy armament. The United States paid dearly for this failure in doctrine.
So concentrated cones of fire from the caliber 50 machine guns cover the sky for 1,000 yards in every direction.
The air war above Europe became a complete war of attrition, with the United States Army Air Corps and the Luftwaffe grinding away at one another. The United States lost about 45,000 pilots and crewmen of the B-17s. The Germans, for them it got so bad they actually ran out of pilots who could fly aircraft and started going to basically flight students with less than 1 hour in the cockpit. The United States, on their hand, had no shortage of aircraft or pilots willing to fly.
The friendly coast of England slips by below. It doesn't look like much now, but in a few hours when you come back, if you come back, this will be the most beautiful view in the world.
The B-17 between 1936 and 1945 reached a total produced number of over 12,000. And over 8,000 of those were produced between 1943 and 1945. That's one fully built B-17 every 2 hours. The B-17 became a symbol of America's inexhaustible industrial prowess. And the game B-17 has kind of been remembered as what happens when you digitize a southern accent. But I'll leave you today with me crashing in northern France and trying to ditch bombs to gain more game time.
Mayday! 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 Mayday!